In the lavish wedding hall of a powerful CEO, every gaze shifted toward a mysterious woman dressed in black. No one had expected her to show up, and certainly not that it would be her. The janitor everyone had overlooked. But when Emily Reyes walked in, the silence said it all. And what happened next, no one there could have imagined. If this story touches your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. The envelope had no name on it, just a golden seal, embossed with a monogram and the words, "You're invited." It was left on the break room counter at Halston Tower, where most employees never even made eye contact with the woman, who wiped their fingerprints off the glass doors, or emptied their trash late at night. Emily Reyes picked it up with trembling fingers, unsure whether it had been left there by mistake. Maybe someone forgot it. She looked around, unsure. The marble floor beneath her reflected a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. Navy blue uniform, worn-out sneakers, gloves that still smelled faintly of bleach. Her heartbeat quickened as she turned the envelope and slid out the card. The names, printed in silver cursive, made her stomach twist. Jonathan Hale and Brittany Carrington wedding. Ceremony and celebration this Saturday, 7 p.m., the Glass Pavilion at Halston Ridge. She blinked. Jonathan Hale, her boss, the CEO, the man whose tailored suits and even sharper silences she had memorized from years of passing. Him in hallways and conference rooms. And Brittany, his fiancée, known for her flawless heels, razor-sharp smile and inherited fortune. Emily's breath caught. Just then, the door creaked open, and Brittany herself entered, heels clicking like a ticking clock. Her red lips curved into a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Oh," she said, pausing with theatrical flair. "You found it." Emily stood frozen. "I thought it would be sweet," Brittany continued, her voice dripping with sugar and poison. "You've worked so hard cleaning up after everyone. You deserve a night out, don't you think?" Emily didn't respond. Something inside her was stirring, maybe confusion, maybe shame. Brittany tilted her head. "It's black tie, of course. I assume you have something appropriate." Her eyes scanned Emily's uniform with calculated disdain. Then with a flick of her manicured hand, she turned and walked out. The room suddenly felt colder. Emily sat on the bench, invitation still in her trembling hand. Was it a mistake, a joke, or something worse, a performance meant not to include her but to expose her? There would be people there, people from the building, people who whispered and stared and never really saw her. She thought about tearing it up, pretending she never saw it, but something stopped her. The way Brittany had smiled, not kindly but like she was setting a trap. Outside the break room window, the city stretched wide and indifferent, glass towers piercing a moody afternoon sky. She glanced at her reflection again, tired, small, invisible. But the ache rising inside her wasn't just humiliation. It was anger, and something deeper, something older. That night in her modest apartment, Emily sat at the edge of her bed, the invitation propped against a chipped coffee mug on her dresser. Her cat, Oliver, brushed against her legs as she stared at the card, lost in thought. Not so long ago, though, it felt like a different life. She had stood in rooms with chandeliers and diplomats. She was Miss Reyes, only daughter of Ignacio Reyes, a respected philanthropist and founder of the Reyes Foundation. She had spoken on panels about education, sat beside CEOs and mayors. People used to wait for her to speak, and now she wiped coffee rings from their desks and didn't even know if this invitation was a cruel prank. Still, the ache wouldn't leave, and in her heart, something shifted, just enough. Her question echoed in her chest. What if I go? Not to prove anything to Brittany, not to Jonathan, but for herself, for the woman she once was, and the woman she might still be. She picked up her phone, hesitating before dialing a number she hadn't used in years. When the line connected, a warm voice answered. "Claire speaking." Emily swallowed. "It's me." A pause, then a sharp gasp. "Emily?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I need a dress." The voice didn't hesitate. "Say no more." But as Emily set the phone down and looked again at the gold invitation, her heart still pounded with uncertainty. She didn't know what would happen at that wedding, if she would be welcomed or laughed at. All she knew was this: she was done being invisible. And maybe, just maybe, that invitation wasn't a curse, but the beginning of something much bigger. The glass doors of Holston Tower gleamed in the late afternoon light, casting golden streaks across the polished floors. Inside, Brittany Carrington was the image of effortless elegance, draped in a pale lavender blazer, heels clicking with purpose, carrying a handbag worth more than most people's rent. She didn't just walk through the lobby, she owned it. Across the marble floor, she spotted Emily kneeling by the elevator, cleaning up a spilled drink. The janitor's cart sat silently nearby. Emily's posture was low, gloves on, head down. Brittany smiled, amused. She walked over. "Emily," she said sweetly, her voice cutting through the air like glass. Emily looked up, startled. She rose slowly, unsure from the previous day's encounter. Brittany's gaze dropped to her smudged uniform, the worn name tag. She held something behind her back. "I wanted to give this to you personally," Brittany said, her tone syrupy. "After all, such a special guest deserves a personal touch." She revealed a second invitation, identical to the first, but held it out with both hands like a gift. Emily hesitated. "I already received—" "Oh, no," Brittany interrupted smoothly. "That one wasn't official. This one is. Think of it as my personal touch." There was something unsettling in her smile. Too perfect. Too bright. Emily took the card slowly. Brittany's fingers lingered, just long enough to make it uncomfortable. "It'll be such a beautiful night," she whispered. "A celebration of love. Jonathan and I really want everyone from the tower to feel included. Even the support staff." Emily flinched, but Brittany wasn't finished. "Of course, we ask for elegance," she added lightly. "There'll be photographers, media. It's a very visible event. I do hope you have something appropriate. Something memorable." Emily glanced down at the card, then back at Brittany's perfectly painted face, impossible to read. She was being set up. That much was clear. This wasn't kindness. It was a calculated show, an invitation to a ballroom she was never meant to belong in. "I'll see what I can do," Emily murmured. Brittany tilted her head, studying her like a specimen. "You always struck me as someone with hidden depths," she said, feigning sincerity. "Sometimes I wonder if people can see the potential buried under all those flaws you polish." Emily's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with fury. Polished flaws. That's all she was to Brittany. Still, she held her expression steady. Satisfied, Brittany gave a slow blink. "Anyway, we'll be waiting." With that, she turned, heels clicking rhythmically as she disappeared down the hall. Her exit punctuated like the end of a sentence. Later that day, Emily returned to the janitor's closet, her quiet refuge in a world that never looked her in the eye. She shut the door and leaned against it, pressing the invitation to her chest. Brittany's voice echoed in her mind, soft, sweet, and dripping with venom. But she didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she stared at the dusty mirror above the sink. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was tired, yes, but there was something else behind her eyes. A fire. They didn't know who she was. Not really, but maybe it was time they remembered. That night, in a penthouse high above the city, Brittany lounged on a velvet chaise, sipping wine and scrolling through social media. Jonathan sat across from her, absorbed in his laptop, barely speaking. "Did you see Emily today?" she asked casually. Jonathan didn't look up. "Who?" "You know, the janitor, the one with the braid and the quiet eyes." He paused, then shook his head. "No, why?" Brittany smiled behind her glass. "I just thought she might enjoy feeling included." He gave a distracted nod, but Brittany's smile lingered long after the conversation ended. She was already picturing it, Emily arriving, awkward and out of place, surrounded by people who didn't know her name. It would be perfect, poetic, a reminder of who belonged and who didn't. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Emily Reyes had no intention of arriving quietly, and her presence wouldn't just be remembered. It would change everything. Claro, aqui está a tradução completa do texto que você enviou. Com linguagem natural, fluida e emocionalmente envolvente, como se tivesse sido escrita originalmente. Inglés por un archivo. The evening sky stretched wide and quiet above the city, painted in fading shades of indigo. Inside her modest apartment, tucked into a narrow corner of East Halston, Emily Reyes sat on the floor with her back against the wall. The golden invitation lay beside her, still unopened, untouched since Brittany had pressed it into her hand like a knife wrapped in silk. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room, broken occasionally by the creak of old floorboards settling. A single lamp cast a soft glow over the worn rug and the stacks of donated books she'd rescued from the recycling bin downstairs. Emily had her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them as if holding herself together. Her eyes were swollen, but the tears had stopped. They had come earlier, hot, silent, shameful. The kind of crying you do when no one's watching, and you're not even sure what hurts more, the memory of who you used to be or the truth of who you've become. She'd held the invitation in her hands over and over, trying to read past the elegant calligraphy to decipher what was truly written between the lines. And it was clear. This wasn't about celebration. It was about humiliation. She could still hear Brittany's voice echoing in her mind. We ask for elegance. It's a visible event, something memorable. Emily pressed her forehead to her knees. She felt small, insignificant, diminished. All the years she'd spent rebuilding a life from ashes, staying quiet, humble, invisible. Had it all been for nothing? But then another voice stirred inside her, softer, older. It sounded like her mother. Being invisible doesn't protect you, Emily. It just makes it easier for people to forget you exist. That voice had lived inside her for years, buried beneath fatigue and guilt. And now it was waking up. She rose slowly and walked to her tiny bathroom, where the mirror was cracked in one corner. She stared at her reflection, the face she rarely looked at for more than a few seconds. Her eyes searched the woman staring back, not for flaws, but for fragments of strength, of memory, because once, not that long ago, she had walked into rooms where people stood when she entered. She had spoken at conferences, held hands with grieving mothers in underserved neighborhoods, launched education initiatives in her family's name. Once she had mattered. The fall had been brutal. Her father accused of embezzlement, false charges, as it turned out, but by then the media had already destroyed them. The Reyes Foundation nearly collapsed. Friends vanished, reporters camped outside their home, donations stopped. And Emily had fled quietly, willingly. She gave up the name, the platform, the headlines. She disappeared into silence. And now, standing there in a uniform that smelled of bleach and resignation, something stirred beneath her ribs. Not revenge, not pride, dignity. She had let the world define her worth for far too long. And for what? So they could hand her invitations laced with cruelty. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Claire. She hadn't answered her call yet, not completely, but her heart had clung to the sound of Claire's voice from the night before, warm, steady, like a hand reaching through the dark. She walked over and picked up the phone. I'm here! Whatever you need. Claire Emily smiled faintly. The old her wasn't gone, just asleep. And maybe she didn't need to come back exactly the same. Maybe now she needed something in between, grace she was born with, and humility she had earned. She looked again at the invitation. This time it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a stage, and whether they liked it or not, she wasn't going to be the entertainment. She was going to be the interruption. She pulled a blank sheet from the notebook beside her bed and, with slow, deliberate strokes, wrote 4 words, I will be there, not for them, for herself, for the woman who deserved to be seen again. But in the silence that followed, as the wind brushed softly against her window pane and Oliver curled by her feet, and thought lingered like smoke in the air. What will they see when I walk through that door? Emily sat on her bed, a photo album resting softly across her lap. She hadn't opened it in years. The cover, once white, had faded to ivory, its corners worn by time and avoidance. Her fingers hovered at the edge, unsure whether to let the past sleep or to turn the page. But something inside her had already shifted too far to stop now. She took a deep breath and opened it. The first photo was a candid shot, a young woman in a sleek navy blazer, smiling beside a podium bearing the Reyes Foundation crest. Her smile was bright and easy, untouched by the exhaustion that now sat behind her eyes. Behind her stood her father, Ignacio Reyes, tall, sharp-featured, with the presence of a man used to being heard. Emily traced the edges of the photo, remembering the flash of cameras, the hush of anticipation, the applause after her first speech. She had spoken about literacy programs for immigrant families. She had felt powerful, not because of money or fame, but because she was creating something meaningful. Back then, people had looked at her and seen promise, legacy, light. She turned the page. There she was again, cutting the ribbon at a new community library, hugging a little girl who had just learned to read. Her name was Amina. Emily remembered her eyes. They sparkled like they already knew their future. So much of her life had been about building futures. And then came the headlines. She could still hear the static of the television in her father's office. She remembered the moment the word embezzlement slid across the screen, followed by footage of her father being escorted out of a charity gala. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters yelled. Flashbulbs exploded like betrayals. It happened too fast. The board turned on them. Donors pulled out. The media twisted assumptions into facts. One anonymous whistleblower, never identified, had accused Ignacio Reyes of misusing funds. By the time the audit cleared his name, it was already too late. And Emily, she was collateral damage. She tried to stay, tried to fight, gave interviews, presented evidence, but her last name had become a joke. Kids in the school she once supported whispered behind her back, "That's her, the daughter of the thief." She stopped speaking, stopped showing up. The trust she'd built, the image she'd protected, everything she thought she stood for was erased by a scandal that wasn't even hers. In one final press release, she announced she was stepping down for the good of the foundation. And just like that, the lights went out. No more galas, no more interviews, no more introductions with weight behind them. She remembered walking out of the Reyes Foundation building for the last time. Rain poured. No umbrella, no one waiting. What she lost that day wasn't just reputation. It was direction. The years that followed were quiet. She left the city, took odd jobs, lived simply, and when she returned, she chose Holston Tower, not because it was far from who she'd been, but because it was close enough to feel the ache of what she once knew, close enough to remind herself never to dream again. But that armor she had worn so faithfully, it was starting to crack. Because over the last few days, something had stirred. Not pride, not vengeance, memory, not just of who she was, but of why she ever tried to become something in the first place. She closed the album and rested her hand on its cover. The world may have forgotten Emily Reyes, but she hadn't. She still remembered what it felt like to hold a microphone with trembling hands and speak for those who had no voice. She remembered the spark in her chest when a child whispered, "I want to be like you." She remembered that her name used to mean something, and maybe it still could. She stood and walked to her closet. Inside, tucked between uniforms and sweaters, was a single box. She reached for it and opened it slowly. Inside was a brooch, silver, delicate, shaped like an open book. It had once been the symbol of her foundation. She wore it to every event, every meeting. She hadn't touched it in years. Now, as she pinned it to her chest, something inside her clicked into place. The world might not remember who Emily Reyes was anymore, but the woman wearing that brooch did, and for now, that was enough to begin again. Even if they laughed, even if they whispered, they would remember her. The city lights blinked through the window, like distant stars as Emily stood by her kitchen counter. Phone in hand, heart racing. The number she'd dialed earlier still glowed on the screen, unsent. Her thumb hovered above the green call button. It had been years. Claire Madison, stylist to the elite, fashion whisperer of red carpets and political galas. The kind of woman whose name alone carried the weight of elegance, whose presence at an event was as expected as the flash of a camera. But long before all of that, Claire had been Emily's best friend. They'd met in college, two ambitious souls running on dreams and too much coffee. Claire used to sketch gowns in the margins of her notebooks, and Emily would pace the dorm floor, talking about transforming education systems. They had been unstoppable, inseparable, until the scandal. Emily had pushed everyone away, especially Claire. Not because Claire left her, but because Emily couldn't stand to be seen in her brokenness. She closed the world off, until now. With trembling fingers, she pressed the button. The line rang once, twice. "Hello?" A voice, smooth, quick, unmistakable. Emily froze. "Claire, it's me." A pause, then a sharp breath. Emily's throat tightened. She almost couldn't answer. But Claire filled the silence. "Are you okay? Where are you? God, it's been, 4 years? Why didn't you ever call me back?" "I was ashamed," Emily whispered. "Everything was falling apart. And I thought if I disappeared, maybe I wouldn't drag you down with me." Silence again, but this time it was soft. "You idiot," Claire said, her voice breaking with warmth. "You could have shown up barefoot and broke, and I still would have called you royalty." A laugh slipped from Emily's throat, tangled with tears. "I need help," she said softly. "Tell me." "There's a wedding. They invited me, but not to welcome me, to mock me. Claire, they want me there so they can laugh." Claire didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She heard it in Emily's voice, that familiar steel waking again. "I want to go," Emily said. "Not for them, for me." There was a pause. Then, in that sharp, fierce tone Emily hadn't heard in years, Claire said, "Send me your address. I'll be there by morning." By 9 a.m. the next day, there was a knock at the door. Emily opened it to find Claire standing there in black boots, sunglasses, and a trench coat that could silence an entire boardroom. Her arms were full, garment bags, makeup kits, fabric swatches, and a silver case that looked like it belonged. Backstage at Paris Fashion Week, but her face softened the moment she saw Emily. They stared at each other. Then Claire dropped everything and pulled her into a hug so full it felt like it stitched something back together. "I missed you," Claire said against her shoulder. "I missed me too," Emily whispered. The apartment became a whirlwind. Claire laid out dress options across the bed, silks, velvet structure, attitude, but none of them felt right, until she unzipped the last bag and revealed a dress Emily had never seen before. It was black, not somber, regal, clean lines, a deep neckline, sleeves that whispered confidence, a silhouette that didn't ask permission. It wasn't loud, but it couldn't be ignored. "I designed it for a gala last year," Claire explained. "But no one wore it." "Too strong," they said. Emily stepped closer, her fingers grazing the fabric. "It looks like a goodbye," she murmured. Claire shook her head. "It looks like a beginning." That afternoon, sunlight spilled through the windows as Claire styled Emily's hair, soft waves, pinned just enough to frame her face. Her hands moved with the tenderness of memory, brushing strands, dabbing cream, sculpting bone structure like an artist restoring a masterpiece. Emily sat quietly, watching herself return in pieces, not as someone new, but as someone she hadn't allowed herself to be in a long time. When Claire finally stepped back and met her eyes in the mirror, her voice cracked into a smile. "There she is." Emily looked at her reflection. For the first time in years, she didn't see the janitor, or the exile, or the woman who ran away. She saw Reyes, and behind her, a friend who had never stopped believing she'd come back. That evening, as Claire zipped the final seam and fastened the silver brooch near Emily's heart, she said one last thing: "They might have forgotten who you are, but when you walk into that room, you're not reminding them for revenge. You're reminding yourself." Emily nodded, eyes glassy. Her heart beat steady, and just before she turned from the mirror, she whispered to her reflection, "Let them look." The night before the wedding, the city pulsed softly beneath Emily's window. Lights flickered like distant echoes. Inside, everything was still. Claire had returned to her hotel, promising to pick her up the next evening. Now Emily stood alone before the mirror. The dress hung on the closet door, untouched, black, bold. Not the kind of black that hides you, but the kind that tells the room, you've arrived, that you're not afraid to be seen anymore. She touched the fabric again. It felt heavier than it looked, structured but soft. Claire had tailored it so precisely. It was as if she remembered the shape of Emily's soul better than Emily did herself. Beside the dress sat her old uniform, folded neatly. The name tag still clipped to the front. A Reyes, She stared at it for a long time, then gently she unclipped the tag, and the transformation began. She stepped into the dress, zipping it with slow precision. The sound of the fabric whispered like something sacred. It wrapped around her, not tightly but purposefully, like armor, like memory. She sat at the vanity, running her fingers through her hair, following Claire's notes, loose waves, light makeup but strong eyes. "Look at them like they're finally listening," Claire had said. This wasn't about cosmetics, it was about reclaiming space. Each brushstroke rewrote a sentence, each curl a story retold. The woman in the mirror wasn't pretending, she was rising. She pinned the silver brooch, a book-shaped emblem from the Reyes Foundation, at her shoulder. It hadn't been worn in 5 years. Now it shimmered like a heartbeat. When the doorbell rang the next evening, Claire was waiting with a sleek black car behind her. She looked at Emily and stopped breathing. "My God," she whispered, "they're not ready." Emily smiled, soft but steady. "Neither am I, but I'm going anyway." The drive was quiet. Claire sat beside her, adjusting the sleeve of Emily's dress just to keep her hands from shaking. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. Emily thought for a moment. "I don't know if this is fear or freedom." Claire nodded. "Maybe it's both." At the entrance to the glass pavilion, luxury cars lined the curb. Guests in gowns and tuxedos glided beneath crystal chandeliers. Paparazzi clustered near velvet ropes. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. Emily stepped out slowly, 1 foot at a time. Her heels clicked softly against the stone walkway, each step a quiet declaration. Heads turned, not immediately, but slowly, like a ripple through the crowd. Some guests blinked, confused. Others stared, trying to place her. The gown, the hair, the posture. It didn't match the uniform they once ignored. She wasn't just present. She was undeniable. The woman walking into that ballroom wasn't asking to belong. She was reminding everyone that she already did. Inside, golden light danced across crystal. A quartet played softly. Waiters weaved through the room with trays of champagne. And still, as Emily crossed the ballroom floor, a hush began to fall. Breath held, heads turned, voices dropped. It was as if something sacred had entered the space. A man dropped his glass. A woman leaned to her date. "Is that Emily Reyes?" "No." She vanished after the scandal. "She founded the Reyes Foundation." "That's her." "She looks radiant. She looks powerful." Emily walked past them, not fast, not slow, not smiling for effect, just present, solid, whole. And the dress? It didn't just contrast the bleach-stained uniform, it confronted it. She was no longer the woman they pitied, or ignored, or mocked. She was something else now, something they couldn't define. Not yet, but they would try. The chandeliers above the ballroom shimmered like frozen fire, casting soft prisms of light across the floor. Velvet-lined chairs, gold-trimmed centerpieces, and cascading white orchids adorned every table, each detail meticulously curated to impress. The wedding of Jonathan Hale and Brittany. Carrington wasn't so much a celebration of love as it was a carefully staged spectacle where appearance mattered more than connection. Laughter bubbled near the champagne fountain, mingling with the clinking of crystal and smooth jazz. Waiters drifted between tables like shadows, carrying hors d'oeuvres that looked more like art than food. And then the doors opened, just slightly at first, then fully, enough for a gust of evening air to slip in before her. Emily stepped through. There was no announcement, no spotlight, just a slow, inevitable shift in the room's energy, like the temperature had changed and no one knew why. Her heels clicked steadily against the marble, unhurried, certain. The long black gown moved with liquid elegance, its fabric catching the light with every step. The silver brooch at her shoulder gleamed softly, subtle but impossible to miss. Conversations faltered. One by one, heads turned. A man in mid-toast paused. A woman with a designer clutch leaned forward. The quartet kept playing, but their eyes lifted, curious, reverent. No one could quite decide what to notice first: the bold dress, her calm expression, or the quiet authority in her walk. She didn't fidget. She didn't force a smile. She simply existed, with a presence that shifted gravity. Someone near the center whispered, "Is that the janitor?" Another corrected quietly but firmly, "No, that's Emily Reyes." And a hush rippled outward, like a tide pulling back before something bigger hit the shore. Jonathan Hale stood near the arch of the stage, deep in conversation with an investor when he noticed the stillness. He turned, following the gazes, and when his eyes met hers across the ballroom, everything stopped. For a brief second, the music felt distant, like it had stepped aside to let her enter. Even the candlelight seemed to still. Jonathan's expression shifted, surprise, confusion, and then something else. "Oh!" Brittany at his side turned, her hand stiffened where it rested on his arm. Emily didn't look at her. She didn't need to. Instead, her gaze swept the room slowly, taking in the gasps and stunned stares. Faces that had only ever seen her in passing, head down, gloves on, invisible. She wasn't invisible tonight. She walked like a woman who had shed shame, like old skin, and stepped back into herself. This wasn't a costume. It wasn't performance. It was reclamation, and although she hadn't planned to stop, her steps slowed as she passed the center table, where executives from Halston Tower sat slack-jawed, the same people who used to toss soiled napkins and never thank her. She met the gaze of one man who once complained about the smell of bleach near his office. He looked away first. She kept walking. Her destination wasn't the center of attention. It was near the windows, overlooking the skyline. But tonight, the edge followed her. The light bent in her direction, because presence, when earned, not inherited, can't be ignored. Near the entrance, a few brave voices murmured, "Wasn't she the one who founded the Reyes Foundation?" Yes. I thought she vanished. She didn't vanish. They erased her. But tonight, she rewrote the script. Claire, standing discreetly near the back, smiled. "They have no idea what's coming," she murmured. Back near the stage, Brittany steadied herself. She leaned into Jonathan, voice light but strained. She showed up. "I guess even the staff enjoy a good party." Jonathan said nothing. His eyes stayed on Emily. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't posing, but she radiated, not with lights or glitter, with truth. And as chatter returned in slow, fractured waves, one fact emerged. The most powerful woman in the room hadn't come to be seen. She had come to remember who she was, and not even the bride could outshine that. The murmurs returned, low, uncertain, cautious. Some guests stole glances at Emily from behind wine glasses. Others whispered, trying to figure out what exactly had shifted in the air, until he stood up. From a corner table near the stage, a man in his 70s rose. He set down his wine glass, adjusted his burgundy silk tie, and leaned slightly on his cane before making his way toward her. Emily noticed him. She didn't move, but something about his posture, the quiet authority, felt familiar. The room took notice. Conversation ceased again. A path opened, not from fear but reverence. When he reached her, he paused, studied her face, then smiled. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, voice gravelly but warm. "It's Emily Reyes." The name hit the room like a dropped stone. Guests nearby froze. Those within earshot repeated it in whispers. Emily Reyes, not for scandal, but for legacy. The man extended his hand. "You probably don't remember me. Walter Cummings, Advisory Board for the Literacy Initiative. You were, 22? You gave a speech at the Roosevelt Center, had senators leaning in like schoolchildren." Emily's voice came softly. "Of course I remember you," Walter chuckled. "Told my wife that night, that girl's gonna change everything. And for a while, you did." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Jonathan took a few unconscious steps forward. Brittany stood rigid, her smile frozen and brittle. Walter turned slightly toward the room, like raising a toast without a glass. "This woman," he said, "isn't just a guest. She's a builder, a founder. Half the schools in East Halston have after-school reading programs because of her." More heads turned. A gasp in the back. A young exec Googled Emily Reyes with frantic fingers. "She went quiet after that mess with her father," Walter continued. "But those of us who knew her work, her integrity, never had any doubts." The room went still again, so silent. It seemed to swallow the music. Then from the center table someone stood and clapped, once, then again. Then another joined, soft, sincere, a ripple. Then a wave. Applause swelled. Not theatrical, but real. Recognition returning. Emily flushed. She hadn't come for this, but she didn't shrink from it either. She stood tall, letting it wash over her, not to feed pride, but to remind herself she still mattered. Her story hadn't been erased. Walter leaned in close, voice gentler. "It's good to see you back. The world's been colder without you." Emily placed her hand over his. "Thank you." He nodded and walked away, slowly, deliberately, leaving behind silence that spoke volumes. Jonathan was next to move. He approached her, unsure, his face unreadable. Something between regret and respect. "Emily," he said low, "I didn't know." She turned to him, steady. "Of course you didn't. No one ever asked." He didn't argue. He just looked at her, for the first time really looked. Not as staff, not as a problem, but as someone who had once held power and might again. Brittany stepped up next, her tone sharp with forced charm. "Well, this is quite the surprise," she said with a tight smile. Emily Reyes, back from the dead. Emily met her gaze, cool and composed. Not dead, just underestimated. No venom, no theatrics, just truth. And the room shifted again. The whispers turned into awe. The glances became interest. A few offered hesitant greetings. Others came closer, some with hands extended, others with awkward apologies hidden in polite words. Even the event photographer snapped a few frames, discreetly but purposefully. And in that moment, Emily realized something simple, something life-changing. She hadn't needed to speak. She didn't need to explain. All she ever had to do was show up. The soft murmur of conversation had started to rise again, but this time, the energy had shifted. It was no longer detached or amused. It was curious, reverent. Emily stood near the window, her glass of sparkling water untouched, surrounded by half-formed admirers and lingering glances. From the center of the room, Brittany Carrington watched it all unfold. Her perfectly sculpted smile had begun to strain. She had spent months orchestrating every detail of this wedding. The lighting, the guest list, the press. It had all been designed to place her at the center of attention, the symbol of elegance and power. And yet, all eyes had drifted to Emily, to the woman she had invited as a cruel joke, a woman who now held the room without even trying. Brittany's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. No, not tonight. She wouldn't lose control. She lifted her chin and crossed the room with heels that struck like metronomes. Against the marble, measured, deliberate, sharp. "Emily," she said sweetly, the kind of sweet that scorches beneath the surface. "You look surprising." Emily turned slowly, meeting her eyes with the same quiet calm that had defined her all night. No anger, no arrogance, just stillness, the kind that unsettles more than any outburst. Brittany's gaze flicked to the brooch on Emily's shoulder. "Still wearing the old foundation pin, I see. How nostalgic." Emily took a sip of water, unbothered. "I find it grounds me," she said softly. "Some things never go out of style." A pause. Brittany tilted her head, voice tighter now. "It must feel surreal, I imagine. Being here with all these people, after everything that happened." Emily's lips curved slightly. "Surreal? No revealing?" "Absolutely." There was a beat of silence. Brittany leaned in, voice syrupy. "You know, I meant what I said when I invited you. I thought it would be generous. After all you've been through." Emily didn't blink. "You meant it as a spectacle," she replied, voice wrapped in velvet and iron. "Not to welcome me, but to humiliate me. You thought I'd show up lost, out of place, out of class." The room hadn't gone quiet, but it wasn't exactly loud anymore either. Heads had started turning. Conversations slowed, strained, paused. Brittany's smile faltered. "That's a harsh interpretation." Emily's voice lowered, cutting like glass. "And yet here you are, scrambling to keep your crown from slipping because people are remembering what presence actually feels like." Brittany's jaw tightened. Emily's voice didn't rise, but it held weight. "You wear elegance like it's borrowed, temporary, dependent on lighting and applause. But real class doesn't shimmer. It listens. It exists without needing permission." A flicker passed through Brittany's eyes. Fury, fear, maybe both. She glanced around, searching for rescue, but no one stepped in. A few guests were pretending not to listen, but they were. Emily softened her tone, but not her clarity. "I didn't come here to shame you, Brittany. I came because I remembered who I was. And you reminded me, painfully, what it feels like to be underestimated by someone who thinks worth is sewn into designer labels and sealed with a last name." Brittany looked like she wanted to laugh, but no sound came. Emily finished her water, set the glass on a tray nearby. "And just so we're clear," she said gently, "I'm not here to prove I belong. I'm here to remind you that I never stopped." She stepped back, gave a small nod. Not a bow, grace. And it left Brittany standing in couture, but feeling very, very small. Emily turned, walked away, and the hush that swept through the nearest tables felt sacred, like something had cracked open and released. Truth into the air, Brittany remained still, her heart pounding louder than the jazz swelling near the stage. And in that moment she understood. Emily didn't need applause. She was the applause. And no amount of money, spotlight, or social strategy could imitate the quiet, unshakable power of a woman who knew exactly who she was. The ballroom returned to its golden glow, but something beneath the surface had changed. The music carried on. Waiters weaved through the crowd, but the focal point of the evening, subtle as it was, had shifted completely. Emily moved through the space like a quiet storm that had already passed, leaving behind stillness and awe. Brittany stood by the dessert table, frozen, her fingers clenched around her glass. The color in her cheeks remained, but her composure had thinned. Too many eyes had seen what she had tried to bury beneath poise and glitter. And one of those eyes belonged to Jonathan Hale. He had seen everything. Not because he meant to, not at first, but once he heard her name, once he saw the way people moved around her, not to avoid her but to witness her, he couldn't look away. He had watched Walter Cummings, the applause, the quiet shift in atmosphere, and now he saw clearly. He saw the way Brittany had approached Emily, her smile like a knife, her tone rehearsed, her words syrupy on the surface, acidic underneath. It was a tone he'd heard before, directed at servers, drivers, assistants, always polite, always cutting. Tonight it hadn't hidden anything. When Brittany returned to his side, Jonathan was already waiting. He didn't smile. "Was that really necessary?" he asked, voice low and clear. Brittany blinked. "What?" "The way you spoke to her, the way you invited her." She scoffed lightly. "I don't know what you mean." He didn't step closer. He didn't raise his voice. But something in his calm made her skin tighten. "She's Emily Reyes," he said. "And you knew that." She laughed nervously. "That was a lifetime ago. Honestly, I didn't think she'd come." "But you wanted her to," he replied. "You wanted her there, just not like that. You thought she'd shrink. You wanted the contrast to flatter you." Brittany's tone sharpened. "So now she's some kind of saint, because she used to run a foundation." "She didn't just run a foundation," he said. "She changed lives. And you knew it. You used her past as entertainment." Brittany's voice trembled. "Why are you defending her?" "Because I just watched you try to break someone who already survived being broken," he said. "And you did it for show." She tried to laugh. "You're overreacting." Jonathan didn't flinch. "I've spent years building a company on the values of strength and resilience," he said. "And tonight, I saw more of both in her than I've seen in this entire room." Brittany opened her mouth, then shut it again. He continued, his voice gentler now but firm. "I thought I admired your ambition, but ambition without empathy? That's just cruelty in designer heels." "You're humiliating me," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "You did that yourself." The silence between them pulsed. He didn't yell. He didn't storm off. But the distance between them grew with every second. Brittany looked around, eyes darting to guests who now felt like witnesses, strangers who had seen too much. She turned back to him, voice trembling. "You're going to let her ruin this night?" Jonathan shook his head. "She didn't ruin anything," he said. "She reminded me what dignity looks like, what authenticity feels like, something I'd forgotten." And after a pause that echoed louder than any toast, he added, "Maybe I needed to be reminded." He didn't make a scene, didn't call attention. He simply turned and walked away toward the back of the room, where the noise faded and the city lights glimmered beyond the windows, leaving Brittany standing alone, in a dress that no longer turned heads, at a wedding that no longer felt like hers. And in that hollow silence, she finally understood what Emily had meant. Class isn't something you buy. It's something you reveal when no one else is watching. The lights in the ballroom had dimmed as the evening reached its final hour. The orchestra shifted to a slower rhythm, and guests began to wander toward the garden terrace, where lanterns floated gently above polished stone paths. The clinking of glasses had softened, replaced by the hush of private conversations and quiet reflections. Emily stood near the tall windows, watching the city shimmer below like a distant constellation. Alone but not lonely, people had approached throughout the night, some offering greetings, others murmuring apologies wrapped in awkward smiles. But now the space around her was still, until a woman approached, tentatively. She was young, maybe early 30s, dressed in a pale blue gown and a veil of nervousness. Her name tag clung crookedly to her clutch, having slipped from her shawl earlier. "Excuse me?" the woman said softly. I wanted to say thank you." Emily turned, surprised. "I'm Olivia," the woman continued. "I work in PR for Halston Group. I used to see you in the elevator sometimes." "And I never said hello."
I didn't know."
Emily smiled gently. "Most people didn't." "I watched what happened tonight," Olivia said. "And I just wanted to say, your grace meant something." Emily nodded. Her voice was calm. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As Olivia stepped away, her words lingered like warmth in a once cold room. Then Jonathan appeared. Something about him had changed, not in his suit but in his presence. He moved slower, with less command, more awareness. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. Emily nodded. They stood together in silence, looking out over the skyline. "I spoke with Brittany," he said eventually. "I should have seen it sooner." "I'm sorry, I didn't." "You don't owe me an apology," Emily replied gently. "What you do next will mean more." He glanced at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Why did you really come?" he asked. "After everything?" Emily took a quiet breath. "I didn't come to ruin your wedding," she said. "And I didn't come for revenge." She turned to face him, her voice steady and personal. "I came because someone handed me an invitation never expecting me to accept. I came because dignity isn't reclaimed in silence. It's something you walk into, even when your legs are shaking. I came to remind myself and everyone watching that your worth isn't decided by the room you're in, the title you wear, or the salary you earn." Jonathan's face softened. Emily continued, her voice low but clear. "People thought I disappeared, but I was always here. Cleaning floors doesn't make you invisible. It just makes it easier for people to look past you." She paused. "I didn't need to prove anything tonight. I only needed to remember one thing." He waited. "That you can lose everything the world values and still never lose yourself." Silence fell, not just between them, but throughout the space around them, as if the room itself had stopped to absorb the truth. Jonathan looked down, then back at her. "I think I forgot what dignity looked like," he said quietly. "You reminded me." Emily gave a soft smile. "Then tonight wasn't wasted," he nodded. No more words were needed. She turned toward the exit, her gown catching the light like ink against flame. As she walked, heads turned again, not in shock this time, but in reverence. Some guests stepped aside instinctively. Others followed her movement with wide, humbled eyes. No applause, no spotlight, just the quiet gravity of someone who had nothing left to prove. At the door, Claire was waiting, a coat folded over her arm and pride glowing in her eyes. Emily reached for her hand, their fingers intertwined. "Ready?" Claire asked. "More than ever." And as they stepped out into the cool night air, Emily looked back just once. Not to see who was watching, but to remember what it feels like to walk away, standing tall. And with that, she didn't just leave the ballroom. She left behind every whisper that had once tried to define her. The night air was crisp, scented with gardenias and the faint hush of distant traffic. Emily stepped onto the sidewalk outside the glass pavilion, her heels echoing softly on the stone. She exhaled deeply as if releasing years of silence. Claire walked beside her, now draping the coat over Emily's shoulders, her gaze full of fierce, quiet pride. Neither of them spoke right away. They didn't need to. The silence between them was rich, full of memory, of release, of something solid beginning to grow in the space left behind. A sleek black car pulled up at the curb. But Emily didn't move toward it. She stood still, looking up at the stars, then down at her hands, steady now, holding nothing but herself. "I thought tonight would feel like an ending," she said softly. Claire turned her head slightly. "But it wasn't," Emily continued. "It was a door, and I walked through it." Claire smiled. "You didn't just walk, you owned it." Emily chuckled. "Maybe, or maybe I just remembered how to stand up again." They stepped into the car, but neither of them checked their phones. Neither looked back. That world had seen enough of her for now. Back at Emily's apartment, the air felt different. Not quieter, just clearer. She slipped out of the gown and carefully hung it near the window, letting the moonlight touch the fabric one last time. Then she changed into soft pajamas, the kind made for rest, not display. Claire sat cross-legged on the couch, already scribbling into a sketch pad. "I've been thinking," she said, tapping her pen. "You don't have to go back to Holston Tower." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And do what? Open a boutique?" Claire grinned. "Not exactly. Something bigger. Something that looks a little like the old Reyes Foundation, but different, smarter, more intimate. Less red tape, more impact." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. Claire leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Picture it, a space led by women. For second chances, for rebuilding, reputation, confidence, careers, maybe even fashion. Who says healing can't be beautiful?" Emily sat beside her, eyes wide. Something had awakened in her. "You want to rebuild the foundation?" she asked. "I want to help you build what you were meant to build," Claire said. "Only this time, you won't be alone." Emily looked up at the ceiling, then back at her friend. "I used to dream like that," she said, "before it all fell apart. Before I learned how easy it is to disappear." Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "You didn't disappear. You paused. And now, you're pressing play again." There was a pause. Then Emily whispered, "I don't want revenge. I want legacy." Claire nodded. "Exactly." The wall clock ticked softly. Outside, the city had no idea a new chapter had just begun. But inside that quiet room, it had. Emily stood and walked to her desk. She opened a blank notebook, tore out the first page, and wrote a single word across the top, Haven. Claire looked up. "What's that?" Emily smiled. "The name for what we're going to build." Claire repeated it softly, letting it settle. Haven, a place for dignity, for truth, for beginnings. They looked at each other, no words needed. This wasn't about fixing the past. It was about building forward, with roots sunk deep into who Emily had always been, and wings shaped by every fall she'd survived. She turned off the lamp and sat in the stillness. No titles, no audience, no performance, just two women. One story closed. And another already beginning. She was invited to be humiliated, but she left applauded in silence. Not for revenge, but for courage. Emily reminded the world that dignity isn't tied to wealth or status, but to knowing exactly who you are, even when everyone else forgets. And maybe, deep down, this story speaks to all of us. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing stories like this, ones that heal, inspire, and remind us what truly matters.